Hey, I've got an exciting section planned for you in the upcoming lessons. We're going to be covering the Google Workspace services. So these are some of the ones that we've covered in the earlier lessons, and we're going to be covering them in more detail. And also, in some cases, these are very commonly used, useful services that we might not have covered. So we're going to be covering them in more detail with some mini projects and illustrating how you can use the various services together to increase your functionality within your Google scripts. So looking at the contacts app, also the language app, generating maps, and there's also coding examples of how you can use the content service, how you can use the HTML service within the Google Apps script to generate web apps, creating a web app, and then using the web app client-side services in order to connect back to the Google script. So running some code in the client side that's going to be sending data and details back to the server side where the Google script can interact with it, do something with it, and then send back a return response, which can then in turn also be picked up on the client side, and then you can do something. And client side is just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So this is the place where you can explore and add in just regular front-end coding that you would in any website and import that and use that directly within your web app within the Google script editor. There's also how you can make a URL fetch app, and you introducing the URL fetch app class. So this allows you to send and get a response back using the HTTP protocol and selecting different websites. And we do have some really interesting projects where we're going to be showing you how you can connect to the Google site and output the contents from the Google website and output that into a web app, as well as connecting to other APIs, getting some data back from those APIs, and then making use of that data within your Google Apps script. So this is going to be an exciting section, and this is going to really open up the door for some of the really advanced functionality and really illustrate some of the power that you can do with Google Apps Script in just a few lines of code. So let's get started going through these upcoming examples of Google Apps Script from the Google Workspace services. This lesson, we are going to be working with the Contacts app class. So that's part of the contact service within the Google services. And this allows us to interact with the contacts that we have. You can view your contacts, your main contacts area by going to contacts.google.com, or you could just click on the Google Apps icon in the top right-hand corner of your browser if you've logged into your Google account and select contacts. So let's go over to the script.google.com and create a standalone script that's going to interact with the Contacts app class. And we're going to get some information about our contacts. We'll create a new contact, and we can also delete some contacts. So creating a name, so contact tester, and just give it a name of contact tester. And then within this, we're going to be creating a list. And if we want to list out all of the current contacts, we want to get all of the contacts. I'll just call it contact. And using the contacts app class, we want to get the contacts. So we can get one contact, we can get contact by ID, we can get contact groups by ID, and we can also get all of the contacts, plus we can list it out by various parameters such as address, by company, contact, field, date. So there's a number of options here where we can select the contacts. So if we want to list out all of the contacts, and I'll update this to say contacts actually, and then within the logger log, let's list out the list of contacts. So this is going to be an array object that gets returned, and we're going to have to accept permissions in order to access the contacts. And it's going to return back a contact class, and then from the contact class we can get more information as to what's contained within that contact profile. And that's coming from our account that we've logged into, and we're running the Google Apps script on the same account. So we're getting all of the contacts that this particular user that we've logged in has. And then from the contact, you can get things like the company name, you can get the group information, the phone numbers, and so on. So it looks like I've got a list of several contacts that I've got within this list. So let's go through the list, and for the contacts, we can go for each, and I'll output it as contact. And then as we're looping through, we can select the contact, each individual contact by the contact class. So let's set up we'll just call it person. And then using the contact object, we can get things like we can add addresses, we can delete the contact, we can get the URL, we can get the emails of the contact person, we get the name, and all of these parameters need to get listed. And there's also nickname and so on, get work phone. And then you can also set some of the contact information. So once we select a contact that we want to use, then we can loop through it and get the contact information, then we can update some information. So we're going to get the primary email of the contact, and the contact that we're going after is going to be this one here. So let's see what we've got within the contacts here. So for this contact, we've just got an email address, a contact details, and we can edit the contact. So there's no first name, no last name, no company, job title, no label. So we're going to loop through the list of contacts and check to see if the person, so that actually is the email, is equal to this string value. And if it is, then we're going to use the logger log, and we'll output some information about the person. So using the contact object, and then using get primary email, we'll output the primary email. So let's run through the list of contacts, and it looks like we were able to identify the contact. So we were able to locate the correct contact. So now that we've got the contact, we can update the contact. So we can set a name for the person. So let's go ahead and update. So it's updating the full name, and the full name is going to require a string value. So this is where you can put in a first and a last name for the full name. And we'll just call it Lawrence Tester. Also for that contact, let's go ahead and set a nickname. And then you can select the different parameters that you want to update. So once you've gone through the list of contacts, you found the person that you've identified, then you can make the updates as needed. And let's take a look at the contact again. So now when we refresh the page, we've got an update to this contact, and we can see that we've updated the first name to Lawrence, last name to Tester, given a nickname of Test Account. And that's how you can make updates to your contacts. And then of course you can also create new contacts as well. So let's go ahead and we'll create a contact. So we want to add a person. Let's select the contact object, and we'll just call it contact. So using the contact app, create contact. And then within the contact, it requires a family name, a string, an email as well. So let's add in where we're creating a contact, and we'll just call it test account, and then we need an email address. So I'll just make one up, and I'll just call it tester@gmail.com. So it's expecting the 3 string parameters in order to add the contact, and that's it. It just adds in the contact, and it's going to return it back as a contact object. And if you're not making any use of the contact object afterwards, you don't have to assign it to a variable name. So you can include the given name, the family name, and the email in order to generate the contact. So let's go ahead and add the person to the list. Run the code, and we'll do a refresh and see if the contact got added. And then we'll loop through and check to see if we've found that new one that we've just created within our other function that we have. So looking for the email address, tester.gmail. And now let's go through and we're going to list the contacts. So it found the contact, the user contact information. And it does sometimes take a few minutes just to make an update to what we're going to see within the contacts. and refresh it. You probably have to refresh it a few times, but that's how you can add a contact using the script. You can also select a contact and update their contact information. And then as well, you can get all of the information that you want from that contact as soon as you've selected the contact object within the contact class. Hey, in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the language service. So this is a service that allows scripts to automatically translate text. So let's select and create a brand new script. So going over to script.google.com, create a new project, and we're going to be using the language app. So let's give this a name, and I'll just call it language app tester function, and we'll create a function. So we'll update text, and this way we can translate the text. So we need to select the text object that we want to translate, and then we want to output the translation. So let's go ahead and create a spreadsheet, and just create a brand new spreadsheet, blank spreadsheet, and we'll add in some words here, and then we'll use the content contained within the words, and we'll translate that information using the translate app. So we'll list out these words, and as we're listing them out, we'll make the updates within column B. So let's grab this spreadsheet ID. And with the language app, you do need to have some default text to work with, and then it's as simple as adding in and passing in the text. So let's set up the ID value. So it's going to be our spreadsheet ID, and then selecting the spreadsheet that we want to use. And we'll just we'll select it all within one statement. So using the spreadsheet app, open by ID, we'll use the ID value, and then we'll select the first sheet. So get all of the sheets, and then we're going to return back the first sheet object. And within the logger log, let's just make sure that we've got the first sheet. And we can also get the name of the first sheet if we want. So use the method get the name, and let's run the update text. We're going to have to accept permissions. So we want to loop through the spreadsheet and get the text that's contained with each one of the cells, and then we're going to translate it into the following column. So do a quick update. So review permissions and select the account that we want to use, provide access for the script to run, and update the sheets, access the sheets. So now we've got the sheet object, and we're ready to loop through the content. So let's get the data that's contained within the sheet. So get data range, and we'll just do this within one statement as well. So return back all of the values of data. So within the logger log, let's take sheet, or actually let's output the data within the log. So run that one more time, and now we should see the data that's contained within there. So let's loop through the data and do a for each. And this is going to return back the string value. So we want to take that string value and we want to update the text. So as we loop through, let's get the translated text. And this will just be the new string. So using that initial string value and using the language app class, do a translate, and then this is where we pass in the string. And we also have some parameters, so we need to have whatever the source language is. So that's going to be English, and the short form for that is EN. And then if we want to translate it into Spanish, that's going to be ES. There's a list of the codes that are available under the translate/docs languages. So ES is we're going to translate it into Spanish. And we want to output those values. So right now we'll just put them into the log and just make sure that we're translating properly. So as we loop through, we're going to have all the translations of the text. So there's the translations. So the last part is just to add it to the spreadsheet. So we want to get the range of the spreadsheet, and we can actually set this row value. We can get the range using the index. So the index is going to start at 0, the rows are going to start at 1. So let's get our range of the object, and using the spreadsheet app, and actually we can just use the spreadsheet object, get the range, and the range is going to be the row value. So this is going to be index plus 1, and the column is going to be column number 2. So it's going to be the range where we're going to be placing the content within. And then take the newly created range and set the value of the range item, and we'll set that to the value of the new string. Save, and let's run the code and see what happens. So now we've done a translation into the next column of whatever word we have there. So we can also add in more words, so sheet, and I don't know if Google translates, but we can add that in. Data, insert. You can have as many words as you want. Goodbye. And let's run that one more time. So again, we get all of the translations. And now, since we're selecting, we're updating the content. And this is just what's being returned back. And because we're setting the value, so it's continuously updating the value content with commas. So that's how we can set and use the language app to make a quick translation of some text. And this is very useful, and it's easy to call within your other Google Apps services and your Google Workspace services. You can easily call in the language app and then translate it. All you need to pass in is the parameters, the string, and then you can set the source language and then the language that you want translated into. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at the maps service. So this is a service that allows scripts to generate static maps, find directions, convert addresses into geocode coordinates, and a whole lot more. So let's go ahead and create a brand new project, and we're going to try out the maps service and give this one, so we'll call it just maps tester function. So that's our new function that we're going to be using, and we're going to be calling to the maps app, so the maps class. So we're going to be using the geocoder class, and this allows a conversion between an address and geographical coordinates. And in this example, we're going to list out some of the matches for our string value and return back the results. So let's go ahead and make the selection, and find me can be the function name. And then we're going to create a doc with a map on it. So let's set up, and we'll just call it map finder, and using the maps, you've got options here for what we want to use, and we want to use the new geocoder class. And then within this, we can set different boundaries and also set a region, set a language. And for the regions, it requires a string value. So if you want it to look for the region code of UK, that's going to correspond to the maps for UK. If we want to look in France, we can use FR. And actually, let's set the region to the US. And then we'll look for the geocode. So looking for Main Street within US. Within the logger log, let's see what we got returned back here. And we'll run the function. So what it returns back is an array of values here. So for the results, so returning back the different latitude, longitude, and for the location. So what we're going to do next is we're going to construct a map and output it to a brand new Google Doc. So using the document app service, and we'll create a brand new doc. And that will just be named whatever the string value is that we're searching for. And then let's create a map object. So using the maps. And then the new static map method. So that's going to construct the map. And so we want to append the image to the doc. So taking the doc and append image. And we need to generate a blob source. So selecting the image, is done with the utilities. And let's generate a new blob. And that blob will be based on the map and get the map image. So the map that we've just generated, and then we're going to append the image as a PNG source into the doc. And let's update to find me. So append image is within the body. So let's take the doc and get the body of the doc and then use the body to append the image. And it just requires the image object. So let's also specify within the utilities when we're constructing the blob, we're going to force it into a PNG. So that looked like that worked. So let's take another look and we'll open up the next document that we've created. And this one generated a map, but we don't have any points on the map yet. So we need to take the data that we've got here and generate some points on the map. And we can do that as we loop through the results. So let's log out the results for the map finder. And then we'll just save and try to run that one more time. So now it's logged out within an array format. So the results, we can get a length value for the results. And it's actually found one result. So let's loop through the length of the map finder. So using a for loop, we'll let I equals 0, and we're going to loop through while I is less than the value of this length. And then increment I by 1. And if we want to get the results value, so let's select the result from results using the index value of I. And within the map object, so actually we need to create the map object first, and then create the map object as an image afterwards after we've set the map markers. So let's go ahead and within the map, set the marker style. And within the marker style, so it requires a few parameters. So we can set a size, so using a string value. We can set a color using a string value and a label using the string value. So if we want to set them, we can set them to null if we want. We can also use the various markers. So let's just set it to null, so it uses the defaults, and null as well. And then for the markers, so what do we want a label for the marker? We can use the value of I plus 1 so that we're setting the marker on the map. And then also within the map, then we need to add the marker. So add the marker that we just created, and adding the marker using the result, and then the geometry, so taking the marker. And we're going to need to return back the latitude and longitude. We have that information contained within the result object. So let's check out what we've got within the result object and get the latitude and longitude back to fill into the add marker method. And returning back the geometry location. And this was all within the object that was returned back, latitude. And then we'll also get the result geometry from the result object, and we'll get the longitude. So we're setting a latitude and a longitude value within the where we're adding the marker. And then within the doc, let's append, actually this should be within the body, append list item, and we're going to take the result and use the formatted address value from the result object. And then after we've constructed the body, we're going to generate an image from it. And I do need to make just a quick adjustment here. So let's set up a variable and call it results. So we'll return back the map finder results, and this way we don't always have to reference the map finder. We can just get the results, and I'm actually going to output the value of the map finder content into the log before we log the results. And this is just going from the map finder object and returning back the results, and then that way we can just use the results object array and output it. And also let's log results to make sure that we do have a variable name there. So a little bit of quick debugging. Let's run the code again. And let's see what happened here within the region. So it doesn't look like it's setting the region properly. And usually the best way is actually to set the boundaries using geolocation. So let's take the bounds and set the bounds for where we're searching. So this is taking the southwest latitude number, southwest longitude number, the northeast latitude number, and the northeast longitude number. So you can do something like this, and I'm going to grab these numbers so I don't have to look up where the coordinates are, and we'll just pop those in. And then we're going to look for within the geocode for the word main, and then we'll just create a new map, call it new map 2. So let's run it again and check out the results within the doc. And we'll look for Main Street. So this time it went back to the US. It found Main Street in New York, and it was able to identify it on the map. So you could go ahead and create the function. You need to look up the latitude, the longitude of the location that you're looking for. And just as you work with a regular map, once you've found the location on the map, you just need the latitude and longitude. You can add a marker to the map, and you can construct the map and add it into your doc. So go ahead and give it a try. And there's also a listing of all of the on the developers.google.com/map/coverage. This will give you a listing of all of the coverage areas, as well as the region codes and the country codes of all of the details here that are covered within the map coverage. Hey, in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the base services. So let's go ahead and create a brand new apps script. So I'm in the drive creating a script. And this is just going to be a tester script that we're going to be using on some of the various other classes that are available and other services that are available. And call it tester scripts. And we'll just create a bunch of test functions. So what we want to look at within this lesson is we want to look at the session class, and that's available within the base class. And we already saw this before where we can get the user information. So if we want to get some of the user information, we can use the session. And from here, we've got some options. So we can get the active user. And let's log out the value that we've got contained within the user. And the way that we use the script services, so they can be used within the main workspace services for added and more advanced functionality. So let's run test 1, and that's going to return back the user object. And from the user object, then we can get some additional information about the user that's logged in and running the script. So we do need to accept permissions, and every time we make some changes or we use a different class, then we're going to have to add in the services. So we get back the user, so we get the email address of the user. We can also get the email address of the user. So it returns back the user by the email address, but we can also get the email addresses. And another service that is within the base service, this is where we find the logger class. So we've already been using the logging. So there's also some additional stuff that you could do here where if you want to log it out within a particular format, you can log out the format. So do test 2. And here we'll select and log out content. And strings can include the $$ values as placeholders, which are replaced with the corresponding values in the list arguments when they're converted to strings. So this is a cleaner way to write out your values. So let's set up a few variables. So we have value 1, hello. And let's set up another variable. And this one can be world. And then within the logger log, we want to output this is the message, and use the %S. And %S. And then now let's select the values that are going to be corresponding. And let's run test2. And this is strictly outputting into the log. So we brought the variables in this way using the placeholders with the %S. So that's another way that you can interact with the log. Or you could just set the straight data. Or within the function test3, we can get the log information. So let's set up a variable. And within the logger log, or actually within the logger, we have an option to get log. So it returns a list of the complete messages. And then within here, we can log that out. Or if we want, let's actually create it into a document. Document app create. So if you want to track your log information into a document, and then within the document body, using the dop app get body, and then for the body, append paragraph. And the paragraph is going to be the response from the log. So running test number 3, and I'll move that up. We need permissions as we're accessing the drive and creating a new file. So accepting the doc permissions. The execution's completed. Let's see what we've got within the log. And we'll log out the value of the contents there to double check and see what happened. So we don't have any information within the info. So we need to get it as text. And the reason we didn't have anything in the log is because we didn't type any information into the log. So let's copy what we've got here and run test again. And this time we've got some content within the log. And when we go out, we see that we've got the message sent to us. You can also send it via email as well. So let's show you how to do that. So under test number 4, so make sure that you do have something in the log before you get the log. And then instead of doing the document app, let's clear that and using the mail app service and then send email. Let's get the user email, so get the active user email, and we'll send ourselves an email. So get the user email, and then from here, get the email object. So this is the email address that we're going to send the mail to. So specify the email address, and you can just have my log, and then within the body, it's going to just have the log information. So it's going to be the value that's going to be contained within the body. And let's also add the email address into the log. So we got some more information there within the log. And save, and let's run test number 4. So we're sending ourselves an email with the log information. And we need to accept permissions because we've added in the mail service. And once we accept permissions, it should send our email address the log information. So that's another way that you can get the log information. And it's great for debugging if you're ever having any issues with the log not showing up. You can email yourself the log. So go ahead and try it out and get more familiar with what other script services are available. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at the content service. So what the content service does is allows scripts to serve text in various formats, such as XML, JSON, and so on. So we need to create a way to output the content, and that means that we're creating a web app in this instance. So under the function, we're going to use the default function doGet. And what we saw with doGet is that this automatically runs the web app. So the web app will look for a function called doGet and output or run the function content and output the content that's specified. So using the content service, we've got a few options here. So we can create text output. So this will just basically output a string value and create a variable called my output and have a value there of hello world. And then let's output the my output value using the doGet. And we need to deploy this. So running and creating a brand new deployment. And as we've seen with the different deployment types, so we want to create a web app. There's also API executable and add-ons. So in this case, we're creating a web app, and I'll just call it tester. So we need to specify who the web app is running by. So what account is going to be executing this web app. So you have a choice to select the current user, which is the one that I'm using that's creating the script. And then you can also do the user accessing the web app. So this will ask the user to log in, and it will run the web app as them. And there are some downsides to this, especially if you're linking to content within your drive. Then that user, if they don't have the permissions to access that content, the script isn't going to be able to run using their account and access the content. So keep that in mind when you're selecting who's going to be executing the app. And as well, a lot of users, they're not going to be logging in. So it depends on if you do need to have a login and if your users are actually going to be using it. The web app will be authorized to run using your account data. So that's where we've got all of the permissions and settings and different access to files that we have. There's also who has access. So you can select that only myself. So when we create the web URL, you have to be logged in to your Google account in order to see the web app. If you do anyone, that means that anyone that's logged into a Google account can see the content, and anyone even anonymous means that this is just an open web URL that you can share, and there's going to be no login. It doesn't matter. Anyone will be able to see the web URL. And if you're using a G Suite business account, then you're going to have another option here that's going to say that within your organization that you can allow the web app. So that's really a nice feature there. So going into only myself, let's go ahead and deploy the web app. We're going to generate a web app, a deployed URL. So this is an executable URL. Open it in a new tab. And this is where we're outputting the content. So we see the little hello world there up in the top left-hand corner. And we can copy this deployed web app URL. You can see past deployments. And there's also, when you click the current deployment, you've also got an option here to test latest code. So this is the app URL that you would be running to test the code. And right now it's the same, but if we make updates to the developer version, it's only going to update the developer version. And the best way to tell which one you're running is to look at what the last characters are after the slash, after the last slash. The executable will be EXEC. So that means that this is the executable. This is the live version. This is the dev version. So /dev is for the dev version. And this is the one that you can use while developing. The users that will have access to it are the ones that are also having access to the app script. So if you're sharing the script file, then they're also going to have access to the dev. Otherwise, other users aren't going to have access to the developer version. So if you were to share the script with other users, you can do that as here where you're managing your account. You can add shares to the project. So if you want to add other people or other groups that are going to be allowed to share and access the script file, then they're also going to be able to access the dev version. And now let's make an update to the dev version. So we've got the output as hello world 2, and going over to the dev, that's updated. Going over to the executable, it's not updated. So that's going to stay the same until we redeploy the app and output different content. So for the different content types that we can output using the content, so we can do what's a set content on the content service. There's also the download as file. So that's going to allow us to download the content instead of displaying it, to download it as a file. So let's return back and using the content service and do the create text output. And then here we've got some more options. So we can set the different meme types. We can get the content. We can get the file name, and we can also download as file. And within the download as file, it's going to require a file name. So this is going to require a string value. And we'll just call it test file. So this tells the browser to download rather than display the content. Some browsers will ignore this setting, while others to null will clear it back to default behavior rather than downloading. So there's some stuff that might happen differently depending on the browser. And the file name is just whatever the download is going to be. So now let's try it within the dev version. And we automatically downloaded the file. And this is just downloading as a text file. So you want to also maybe include the extension. And you can set the different meme types as well. So there's our text file, and we can open up the text file and we can see the content there. So this is the way to create and get the content to be downloadable. You can also set the meme type of the content. And there's a bunch of other options that you can get within the content service. So go ahead and try it out. This lesson, we're going to be looking at the HTML service. So this is one of the script services that are available within the app script. And this service allows app script applications to return HTML, usually as a user interface. So we saw this before with the modals and the sidebar menus, and also within the web apps. So let's go ahead and we're going to set up our default function. So that's the do get, and that's going to be launched by default. So looking for any of the web apps or the web applications are automatically going to go to do get. And the HTML output object can be served from the script, and it also allows us to return back HTML. So there's a number of options of what we can return back. So let's create a string value, and within the string we'll have some HTML. And just a little bit of HTML content there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to return back the HTML using the HTML service class. And then we've got a few options here where we can create HTML output. We can also create HTML output from a file, create from a template, and create from a template file. So we just have some basic HTML that we're creating and returning back from a string value. So we can return that back. And now that we've updated our doGet functions, we need to update our web application. So going over and do a new deployment and make sure that the document type is going to be a web app. So test app, and then setting who the app executes as, and then also who has access to the web app. And then let's go ahead and deploy this web app. So that returns back a deployed URL. So this is the executable URL. So if we do update the code, we need to redeploy it every time. So there's our HTML being delivered and output there on the screen within the web app. So this is the executable URL, is also the one that you'd be sharing with others to access the application. The dev version, just as we saw with the content service, this is going to be the one where we're updating the content. So once we're done, and if we were to update any of the content or make changes, this is only going to be reflected in the dev version, and that's up until we redeploy the application. So that's how we can return back HTML, just regular HTML. So we also want to return back HTML from a template, so using the template service. So let's create a template and return back the HTML from a template. And there's also an option to return back HTML from a file. So actually we'll do that one first, and then I'll show you the template. So it does require a file name. So we need to create a brand new file, and this is just going to be a regular file. This is going to be our output, and then within the file, so this is regular straight front-end code, so you can use CSS, you can use HTML, or you could use JavaScript, and I'll just put a message of hello. And this is going to be paragraph there. And then also here as well, we can add in a style tag. And we can make a selection of the body. And then within the body, let's set the background. And we'll set the background color to red. So we created a file, and we want to execute and return the content from the file. So let's recreate this, and I'm going to update this to get2, as you can only have the one get, so we don't want to have any conflicts there. And we want to output the HTML using the HTML service and output it from a file. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'll make the updates to it. So return it back to get, and we want to get HTML content from a file. So using the HTML service and create HTML output from a file. And then the parameter that's going to be asking for is going to be the file name. So we need to add in the file name, and this is expected within a string format. So the file name, you don't need to include the extension. So in this case, I only need to include index, and it's going to generate the HTML for the file. And if we do a log of the HTML code, and then for the return, we can just return the HTML. So let's run the do-get. And it's creating the HTML output object. And if we update the developer version, we've got the new file. And of course, if we want that to deploy, we can set up deployment, and we can deploy the application to the new version. And that way, we need to create a new version. So it's a new deployment, and it should be test 3. And deploy it, and now we can go out to the executable, and we're going to see the changes take place. So all of the updates and changes. There's also a few other options for the HTML service that we can output and create from a template, and also from a template file. So let's update this, and I'll just copy the code, and we'll duplicate it and give the do-get value of do-get3, so that way we're not conflicting with the do-gets. And this time we're going to use the HTML service, and we're going to create from a template. So from a template creates it from HTML code, or it can also create it from a blob, but we need to create a template from it. So in order to generate the template, we can create up the template that we want to use. And there is a difference between the template. So what it does is the object actually returns script within the object of the template. So let's use the template that we're just going to be creating, and template temp. And that's actually going to run some script. So it's returning the code, which is the template. And we can get rid of the log. And then within the template, let's create and construct a template. So we can use regular HTML code, but we can also add the scriptlet, the Google Apps script code. So this can allow us to interact with some code on the client side. And as we're generating this, let's create the template. So similar to what you get with HTML with PHP, where you use the greater than and question mark and equal, and this allows you to run some code, and then the question mark and the greater than sign. So this scriptlet will evaluate the code, and when we're returning it, we need to evaluate in order to render out that code. And also, if we want to see it within a function, we can do this as well. So we don't always have to have it within the do-get. Just create a default function. I'm going to copy the content out. And within the log, if we want to see the output, we need to run a function of get content. So that's the method that's going to output the content. So first let's try the get one and we'll run that code. So we generate, and you can see we've generated the date, running the date, and that's run the code for the date and running it from the Google Apps script. And then as well, we can over to the page, we can load the page object, and that's also going to output the current date and time into the web page. So we can also get this from a template as well. So getting the HTML, we can get it from a file. We can get the file from a template as well. So let's copy this over, and I'll just make another duplicate of it. And instead of using the create template, we're going to create a template from the file, and then we're going to add in some of the code here into the file. And also for the template itself, let's output, actually let's create another file. We'll duplicate this one, and this one is going to be a template, and then this can just be the index. So going into the template, we can get rid of the styling. We're not going to need that. And we can pass in values. So as we saw, we can render out server-side code. So getting the new date and output the code into the page. In addition to that, we can run other scripts. So if we have a variable that we want to access, we can access the variable and passing that from the server side to the client side, and just output whatever the value of test is going to be. So going into the script, let's create the HTML from a template. So we don't need the template here, and create it from a template file. Create template from file, and the template file, and this is expecting a string value for the file. And then in order to return it, then we need to evaluate the content. Or the other option as well is to add in some variables. So within the HTML, we did have a variable that we added in, and the value of the variable was test. And let's assign a value to the variable that we have as test. And now when we go out to the web app, you can refresh it, and you see the output of hello world is brought from the server side to the client side. And don't forget, you need to include the evaluate in order to evaluate the services. So coming up next, I'll show you how you can send data from the client side over to the server side. And that's also going to be within the HTML service. So go ahead and try out a few different ways to create your web page content. And then once you've got the content, you can create new deployments as well of the content. And then check it out and share the URL of your web app. In this lesson, we're going to be outputting content to a web app from the server side, from the Google script side over to the client side, so using one of these files that we have within the client side. So let's first get some data, and we're going to output data from a spreadsheet. So getting the spreadsheet object, I'm going to loop through the data here that we've got within the spreadsheet, and I'm going to output that into the web app. So let's go over and create the function. So the doGet function, so that's the default one for the web app, and set up the ID value so that we can connect to the spreadsheet. And let's select the sheet object of the spreadsheet. So using the spreadsheet app, and open by ID and the ID value that we have. And then also from here, let's we can get the sheet by name if we want. So it's just sheet 1. So get sheet by name, and the name is sheet 1. So that's going to return back the sheet object. And then let's also get the data. So the data that we want to pull in from the spreadsheet is going to be what we have within the sheet object, and then get the data range. And this is going to return back all of the data. And then we want to get the values that are contained within the data range. And for now, let's log it out to the log. And we're going to pass it over to one of the files to output on the client side. So using some JavaScript in order to output that. So let's run doGet and see what we've got. We need to accept permissions because we're added the spreadsheet app objects. We need to accept the permissions for that. So we're outputting the data in a multi-dimensional array. So just as we've expected and as we've seen before. So what we want to do now is we want to pass that data over to the client side. So let's create a file, and I'll just call it output. And from within the Google script, let's set up an object that we can use in order to send the content over from the data object. And this will be the HTML response. So using the HTML service and create template from file. And the file that we want to use to create the template from is going to be output. And we want to add the data from the spreadsheet as data that we're going to be passing over to the client side. So we can use the HTML object, and I'm just going to give the object a name of data, and that's going to hold the data object that we've just pulled in. And so once we've set up the HTML object, we're ready to return it. And then don't forget to run the evaluate if we want to evaluate some of the content on the client side. So let's create within the output, and we'll create a script tag so that we can run some JavaScript. And in order to pass it over, we need to run some client-side script as well and pass the data from the server side into the client side. And then that way it's going to be directly within JavaScript. So data from the Google script, and we evaluate the data and return it as JSON stringify, and then take the data object that's being sent in from the server side. So we're returning this back as data, and then let's console log it. So this is just regular straight JavaScript, and at this point we should have as a JavaScript object, and then we can loop through it and we can do additional functionality with it. So let's try running the code and see what happens. So we can use the dev tools. So open up the console, and now we've got this array of the data, and this is coming directly from that spreadsheet, sending the data from the spreadsheet through the app script to the client side. So now it's just a matter of looping through the data and outputting it to the page. So let's go ahead and output the content to the page. And what I'll do is I'll create some page elements here. So this can just be a div and a class of output, and then we'll append all the content there within the div. And so for the script, now that we've got it within JavaScript, we can loop through the data.js and use for each to loop through each one of the elements in the list, and we'll console log them just to make sure that we've got each element, and make use of the console. So we've got each one of these, so that's an array. So we want to populate the content on the page with what we've getting from the spreadsheet. So we've got it within an array. So there's 2 items within each one of these array items. So let's build our output onto the page. So using the output and select it using document and then query selector, selecting the element with a class of output. And I like to console log it just to make sure that we are getting the output object properly, and then refresh again. And so now we've got the output object into the console, and we can output the content into it. So let's create a div, and using the document object, create element, and the element that we're creating is going to be a div. And then within the div, adding in text content. Actually, we're going to create 2 spans within the div. And we can do this with a loop. So let I equals 0, while I is less than 1 or less than 2. We want to loop it twice. Then we're going to create the text at the spans within and place them within the div. So const span, and actually let's do let span, and selecting the span using the document create element, and we're going to create the span element, and then within the span have the text content and assign the value of the text content to be equal to the first item within the array. And actually we're going to be using the I in order to output it. And then once we've created the span, then we take the div and we append the span to the div. And then we take the div and we append the div, or the body, we append to the output area the div object after we've looped through and we've added the spans. So let's see what this looks like, and we'll do a quick refresh. And we're outputting all of the content on the page now. And let's update the text content so there's a little bit of spacing around it. And I'll put a dash there between it. And I'll see what that looks like. So now we're getting live data that's coming from a spreadsheet. So that means that if you were to make some updates to it, and then you go out and you refresh your web app, the updated content is now present. So this is a way that you can get content from a spreadsheet and output it onto the page. So let's do another one where instead of getting the content from the sheet, we're going to get the content from the E parameters. And the E parameters are within the web URL. When you do something like ID equals 100, you want to get the value that's in the web URL. So you can pick that up as well within the E parameters. So selecting the do get, and make sure you put a parameter there, E. So E is going to be the event parameter. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create another. So make a copy of this, and I'll call it para for parameters. And then we'll use that as the script that we're outputting. And I'll get rid of some of the JavaScript we had there, as we're only going to have the one parameter that we're picking up and that we're sending over. So we will still get the data object, so we'll still pass it as a value for data. And let's copy some of this to save some time. So this time we're going to be using para. And the objective is to pick up that value of 100, or it can be whatever, so it can be hello, and output it on the page. So for the data itself, we want to look, and if you want to look for a specific parameter, so if you know and you're expecting a parameter of ID, you can look for the ID in E parameters. And I'll log out all of the parameters into the HTML client side as well. And if the value of E ID, and let's set some value. So let's set allowed false, and only if it has an ID, then allowed will be true. And also I'm going to use let so we can update it. So if ID is in the parameters, then we'll pass in the ID as allowed. So we'll set allowed to equal ID. And actually let me update this, and we're just going to set it to 0. So that we're assigning the value of 0 to allowed. And if ID is in the parameters, then we're going to take whatever we've got, we're returning back for the ID value. So instead of 100 and hard coding 100, we want to pick up the value in the E parameters and select the ID using the bracket notation. And because it's parameters, there could be more than one ID, so we want to pick up the first one. So now that we've set the within the parameters, we want to create. So we've created the template file from the para file. And I'll keep it named as data. And then we'll output the content of data as allowed. So let's see what happens and check in the console if we can pick up that value. So there's nothing being passed, so the value of ID hasn't been passed. So let's say if we do have a value of ID of 1000, then we get the value of 1000 being passed in there. So now within the parameters, if we want to use that, same as before, we can take the output, update the value of it, and set the text content to be whatever we've got for data GS. And because this is an object, so we're just returning back the data GS. So let's see what happens. So now we've got 1000, 100,000. So whatever value we set within the E parameters, that's going to be output on the page. So go ahead and try this out. And coming up is going to be part 2 to interacting with the client side from the server side. Within this lesson, we're going to be creating a way to run your web app, and then you can send some test data, and you can send whatever you want over to your Google script side by doing a submission, and then that gets tracked back into a spreadsheet. So this provides you a way to have communication between your client side, which is this web app, and sending data and information over to your Google Apps script and running a function on the server side within the Google Apps script. And in this case, what we're doing is we're connecting to the spreadsheet, and then we're adding content into the spreadsheet. So that's what we're going to be creating in this lesson. Running code on the client side and sending some data over to the server side. So there's a few functions to do that, and let's first start by setting up our function and using doGet in order to render out our web app, and then creating the HTML content. And we're going to be using one of these files as a template, so I'm going to make a copy of index, and I'll give it a name of data, so we'll update the file afterwards. So let's use the HTML service and create template from a file, and the file that we're going to use is data. And then let's return HTML evaluate to return back the data. And on the server side, you can get rid of the styling, and we'll keep those. And actually, let's set up some of the JavaScript. So I'll copy it from the other project that we have there, and that will give us a place to start writing some JavaScript code. And just make sure that we've selected the output content so that we can create some interaction and also some output on the page. So let's do a refresh of the page. And we've got the one element, so it's ready to go. And also let's add in some other options here. So input, type, and let's set the type to text and give it a name of message. And then we can close that. And we also want to select the input content, and then also let's add one more item. So button, send data. And so what's going to happen is whenever the button's going to get pressed, then whatever message we have here, and I'll also just add in a placeholder as well. So that's going to send the message over to the server side. So whatever content we have within the input field. Let's refresh and see what we've got here. So we've got an input field and a button. Right now not doing anything. And this is now done on the client side. So we've got our input, and this is going to be our message object. So selecting using query selector. selecting the input. I only have the one input on the page. And also let's select the button element, and then we can add the event listener to the button element. And this is all just regular client-side JavaScript. So nothing yet with the Google Apps Script. And we want trying to get the message value so that we're ready to send it over to the server side. So with the button, add event listener, we're going to listen for a click on the button. And if it gets clicked, then we're going to run the Google script. And for now, we'll just console log, and we'll output whatever we've got for message value. And eventually, we're going to be sending that message value over to the server side. And I'll just put a default value there so I don't have to keep typing a default value, and save. And so right now, what should happen is when we click the button, we should get the whatever value we've got within the input into the console. So that means that we're ready to send it over to the server side. So the function to send the data over is we need to connect over to one of the server side scripts. So using the Google script run, we want to run some code. And this is going to be related to whatever we've got the function on the server side. So for now, within the server side, we'll have a test data. So this is going to retrieve back the information or test message. So this is going to be the function name on the Google script side. So going over to here, and we're going to be running the test message and then passing in the value from the message value. So let's go back to the server side. And what we want to do is we want to get the message. So you don't have to call it message, you can call it whatever makes sense. And within the logger log, let's get the test message. And then we'll also return back the test message value. So this is our opportunity to do something with the test content. So let's do a refresh and try it out. So this just means that it sent the data to the server side. So it made the request and sent the data. And we're not returning anything. If we open up the execution log, we're not going to have anything in there because we're not tracking the execution log as they're running. But what we want to do is actually we want to add this data to the spreadsheet. So we already have a spreadsheet here that's open. So let's create a new sheet object, and this can just be the message. And then we'll select that sheet object information and we'll append the row. And that way we can see the data that's coming in. So selecting, let's select our sheet that we want to use so that we can append the row. So using the spreadsheet app, open by ID, and we need to still set the ID. So const ID, and set the ID value. And then we'll open by ID, get sheet by name, and the sheet name that we're looking for is message. So that should return back the sheet object. And then within the sheet, let's append a row. And we're appending a row with new data, and the data is going to be whatever we've got for the message. And within the log, this actually should be message. And now let's save it and see what happens. So send. If we go to the logs, we still don't have anything, but if we go over to the spreadsheet, we've got the value that's been inserted. So let's try it again. And this time write new value, go over to the spreadsheet, and that's being added to the spreadsheet. So it's coming from the web app, and if you've got the web app open to anybody, then that can populate some data directly within the spreadsheet. So if there's also a few other options that you can select, and one of them is the with success handler. So again, this is on the client side, and this allows you to run a callback function. So instead of just sending over to the message, it's with success handler. And the with success handler what function that we want to run, and we'll run a function called onSuccess. So that's the only parameter that's expecting. And then within the client side, and this is how you can do some debugging and just make sure that your success was your request was successful, where you can log back. So within the code, we're actually going to be returning the message. So you can do something like, actually let's set this into an object. And response, set that to true. And message, and we'll set that to whatever the message is. So that way we're returning back an object. Of course, you can just return back a string if you want as well. I usually find with the object it's a little bit more flexible. So within the console, whatever we're getting returned back after we click, we want to check that out. So let's refresh the developer version, send. And so now we're getting the object back. So we've got the message of testing, response is true. And if you've got additional information, you can pass it back this way as well. So this can now be seen within the client side. So that's how you can create interaction from the client side to the server side, add content into the spreadsheet, and also run functions within the Google script from the client side. So once you've made the updates, let's do a new deployment. And I'll call it add to sheet. And then this can be just set only to myself. So this is going to be my own personal web app where I can go in and I can update sheet data and send that over. And we can update the contents within the sheet that way. Hey, in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the properties service. So there's a number of different properties services that we can use. There's the document properties. So this is related to the property that stores all of the users that access and open the document, spreadsheet, or form. And for this, we're going to be using a bound script. So opening up the script editor of a spreadsheet. So any user now coming into it, we can store a particular value to it. So using the document properties service, so we can set a property and we can also get the property. So let's create a function and we'll call it set p or setter p. I should just call it set p. So this is going to be where we're going to be using the document properties service and set a property for it. And it's fairly straightforward. So it's just using the properties service. And we want to also maybe pick up the document properties service. So doc prop as an object, and then let's use the properties service. And then we're going to get the document properties into an object. And so once we've got the document properties, we can get and we can set and we can also delete keys. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, this is the similar to what you can do with local storage and session values. So storing and keeping properties. And the document properties are going to be stored on this document. So every time that that document gets interacted with, it's going to take from that particular storage location. And this is where you can get content or the property value. So let's set property. And setting the property, it requires two arguments. So one is a key and one is a value. And I'll just call it my key. And then this will be whatever my value is. And within the log, let's list out. So using the doc prop, we'll get all of the properties as an object. And we can also loop through them. So let's save that and we'll run setting of the property. So when we execute, and remember this is using the document properties. So properties store that all users can access within the open documents sheet. And so it's going to be set to that particular file. So there's our property that we're outputting there. And let's set another one. We'll call it my key 2. And now when we run and we get the properties, we should have 2 property values there. Let's do a log of the props. So that's going to add 2 items. And now we still only have 2 because the key, if we're setting it a value to the key, then we can also update the key this way. So as long as we're referencing the key, so we're not going to be adding any more properties, because we've already added the my key, and the my key is going to stay there, and the my key 2 now, we're actually just updating the value. So if we want to update the value, it's the same as setting the value. So now the value of that is going to be value 3. And so props is going to be an object. So if we want to return back the value for my key, we can do that by referencing the property name. So it's going to return back whatever value is associated with it. And also commonly, you can also use the bracket notation. So sometimes that's a little bit easier to read than the dot notation. So probably the preferred way to get the object key and return back the value is specifying it with the property. So if we update this to 3 and update this to 4, that's going to create another property value that we're setting. So now we've got 3 of them there, and that old value, this is the one from before when the first time we ran the script. So these values stay with the document. We can also remove out the values if we want. So there was a few other options there within the property store. So when you select the property store object, you can delete all property keys. You can delete a property. So if we want to, for instance, delete one of them, and we want to delete whatever my key 3 is, and then we'll list out all of the properties afterwards. So after we've deleted it, and now let's run that one more time. So now we've deleted the my key 3, and we're just down to the 2 properties. And this is an object, so in order to reference the content, it's done via the object. There's also script properties, so it works the same way. So all 3 of these are going to work the same way. And this one, actually, let's set this to be set. This will be property for doc, and it's going to be very similar for the property for the script. So this one is going to be the get script properties. So it allows us to store the properties that are only within this script. So any properties only within this script itself. So not within the document, within the script. So using the properties service, let's get script properties. And then the rest of it is actually going to be the same, where we can set the properties. So actually this shouldn't be doc property, but we'll just leave it at doc property. And then in this case, we're going to be setting some of the script properties. So let's run that. And we can see here that we're setting the value, and we only have the 1 within the script. Let's run it one more time. So we've got the 1 within the script value. And let's run 2. And that's going to have a second value, so my key 2. And the current value is this. And it's only within the script as it's executing. So if you want to have it for a longer term, attach it to the document. And then there's also a last one for the user. And this is a property store that only the user can access, and it's only within this script. So function, so property user. Again, very similar in format. So I'll just copy and paste, and I'll still use the doc prop as our variable name. So let's get the user properties object, and then let's run that. So there's our user properties, and save, and just run it a few times so that we can get the hang of it. So this one for the user, it's allowing us to add multiple values. So if I have one more, And let's add the third value in. And all of the functionality, if you want to delete them, then you just need to get the property key in order to delete. You can clear out all of the property keys as well. And these are really useful to store bits of data across users, across the document, or across the script. So go ahead and try it out. Have some fun with it. This lesson, we're going to be looking at the class URL fetch. So it allows you to fetch resources and communicate with hosts over the internet. So you can think of it kind of similar to what you would do with an AJAX request, making a request to another endpoint somewhere online and then returning back the content from that request. So let's go ahead and create a function, get website, and we'll make a request over to a website. So set up the response object and using the URL fetch app and then running a fetch request. We need to provide a URL that we want to request to. So let's go ahead and we'll try Google at first. So without the HTTP, so just do the google.com/, and that's going to be the URL that we're going to try to request from. And these requests are actually coming from IP addresses within the Google script. You can get a list of the IP addresses as well that it's going to be making the request from. So it makes the request to fetch a URL, works with HTTP as well as HTTPS. And here they've got an example. So they're making the request to Google and then they're getting the content of it and they're outputting it within the log. So how about we do the same thing where we update and send the request to the web URL. And then within the logger log, let's do our response and get the response content using the get content method. And the get content as text method writes the string of content as text. And let's close that statement off and see what happens. So within the get website, we need to review the permissions as we're making a request and write the content. And so that gives us all of the text content that we have within the website. Logging output is too large, so it's got quite a bit of stuff there within the content. So how about we create a web app, and on open we'll run the script and we'll output the content and get HTML content from the response request. We'll return using the HTML service, create HTML output, and we'll create the HTML output from the Google website. So running to get, not on open. So let's redeploy that. So that was a quick mistake, test. And now whenever we go over to the web site, we're actually rendering out Google within our website. So let's try a few other ones. So sometimes you might need to connect to an endpoint. So maybe you want to get some data from an endpoint. And we'll just create a function to get the data. And then you can use the data as you want within your projects. So here we've got randomuser.me, so it's an endpoint API that returns back a bunch of random user data within a nice rich object. So let's set up the URL, and this is going to be the endpoint that we're going to use in order to connect to and get the data. So just select that endpoint, and then using the fetch, and then we'll log out the content just to see if we've got the content properly, and then we'll loop through some of the content. So it's within an object format, and we can loop through. So it's actually tourniqueting, it's too large. So we can loop through the results object. So within the get content, and we'll get the results from the response text object and get the value for results. And let's output results into the log and try that one more time. And let's we need to get it as text, but then we need to convert it into an object. So the data comes in as text data, and then using results, we'll and then JSON parse is going to parse the text data into a usable object, and then we'll output it into the console as an object. So now we've got it as an object format, and we've got a bunch of results there. And just a few other quick fixes. So we don't actually need to output it as the text content, so we can remove that, and that means that we're getting the results there as results, so rep. And I'm going to decrease the amount of text that we're getting back so it's a little bit more readable. And now let's see what we've got here when we're getting the data. So we've got the results is equal to 3, and within the results, so we've got an object called results. So it's going to create the array of results, and that means that we can loop through those. So using for each, and this is going to return back each person that we have within the array. And then within the logger log, let's just log out the person. So I'll remove out this one here, and we'll run through and we'll log the people. So those are each of the individual peoples, and again, an object. So you could go down within this object and you can get information like the name. So there's the first name and last name. So let's do that as well. So return back the name of the person. And so we've got first name and last name. So if you want to track this into a spreadsheet, so you can do that as well. So let's select the spreadsheet that we used before and create a brand new sheet there. And this will log content from the web app, and this will just be people. So let's get the spreadsheet ID and then go into the app that we're working on and set the ID of the spreadsheet. And now let's get the sheet that we want to use. So actually that should be lowercase. And using the spreadsheet app, open by ID, provide the ID that we want to open it on, and then get sheet by name. And the sheet that we want to select is people. So that's the sheet that we want to work on. And so now that we've got it within a sheet, we can take the sheet and append a row. And within the sheets, as we're appending the rows, we can get the results of the person, name, and we did have first, and I believe we had last. So let's run through that one more time just to make sure that we've got first, last. So now it's adding the people into the array, so title as well. So just comma separate these out just as you normally would. And we've got person, title, person first, and then person last. And this way you can pull a bunch of information from a web URL and populate your sheet with the information if you want. You can also create files on the fly using the Drive app class. So it's a fairly straightforward one. File, so create a brand new file and set that file. So using the Drive app and the create, and that actually should be a dot. So create file, and then just setting up what the file name is. So people.json, and then it requires some data, and we've already got the data within the results. So just comma separate it out and results. So that will track it as a JSON file and save it to your drive. And then if you want to move it around, we already saw how we can move files into specific folders. So let's run it again and go to our drive. And we do need to accept permissions. So every time you run or do something new with the script that is connecting to a different service and you haven't provided the permissions yet, it's going to ask you for the permissions. So it's going to be connecting to the web random user API, pulling that information back, and then parsing the results using JSON parse. And this is works the same way as JSON parse and JSON stringify in JavaScript, where we can parse a string value into an object, and we can also turn an object into a string using the stringify method. And then getting the ID of the spreadsheet, selecting the sheet that we want to populate information into. So as we're looping through each one of the results, we're getting the person as a person value, and we're logging out the name, and then we're appending it to the row. But we're also creating a file here called people.json. So if we want to do something else with the file name, such as move it around, then we can assign a variable to it. If not, you can remove out this part and just create the file. So now going into where we've got the file, we created a newly created file, so it's within an object format, and it does need to be within a string format. So that's where we should be actually, instead of the results, whatever was the raw data that came back, and that came back within a string format. So let's run that one more time and create another people.json file, and that should be available at the bottom. And so now we've got a JSON file on our Google Drive of all of the data that we've just pulled in. And I'll just give this a name of AppScript Tester. So go ahead, try it out, and try all the different things you could do with the URL fetch app class.